The fact that you clicked on this video suggests that you are looking forward to a Steam Deck 2. You see, the Steam Deck is struggling to run a lot of newer AAA titles, so if Valve wants to keep the Steam Deck relevant, it is not a matter of if, but when we may see Valve reveal a Steam Deck 2. So today I'll discuss number 1, why we need a Steam Deck 2, number 2, what we know so far about the Steam Deck 2, and number 3, last but not least, why I think 2028 is the right time for Valve to reveal a Steam Deck 2. Let's check it out. So when the Steam Deck released in February 2022, it got a lot of gamers excited. As far as older and less demanding games, they were able to run butterly smooth on high settings on the Steam Deck. And as far as more recent AAA games goes in 2022, it was kind of like a mixed bag. Some of them were able to run at solid 40s to 50s frames per second, while there were others that were able to run at solid 30 frames per second. Now, as far as an average gamer goes like you and me, these games were really presentable and they were really fun and enjoyable on the Steam Deck. However, towards the end of 2024 and onto early 2025, that's when we kind of realized that the Steam Deck kind of has trouble keeping up with the more recent AAA games due to the recent AAA games being much more demanding. As far as me goes on this channel, Nomadic Gaming Guild, the first ever review that I did was talking about Spider-Man 2, showcasing the game, how well it runs on the Steam Deck and whatnot, and I will say this, it was not a great experience. As far as the game goes, there were a whole bunch of stutterings, lags, glitches, there was also intense frame drops, as well as there were also crashes. Now, I do understand that people that play on the full-blown desktop gaming PCs, as well as the full-blown laptop gaming PCs, they have also reported that there were optimization issues. Sure, I get it. But as far as the Steam Deck goes, I would say that a huge factor of it running really bad and whatnot is due to it not being powerful enough to run Spider-Man 2. Because let's say if you have a full-blown high-power desktop gaming PC rig, as far as Spider-Man 2, even though it may not run as well as other games due to it not being as well optimized, but at the very least it will be able to run at an acceptable frame rate, much higher than the Steam Deck. Now, another example that I would have to say with the Steam Deck not running too well when it comes to more modern AAA games is Wuchang Fallen Feathers. Now, Wuchang Fallen Feathers, I have not played that game on the Steam Deck, so take it with a grain of salt, but I have looked at, performance review channels and where they showcase the gameplay aspect of Wuchang Fallen Feathers on the Steam Deck, which is a game that released in kind of mid 2025, in which I believe, and where the game really does not run well on the Steam Deck either. Sure, there is the argument that it is poorly optimized across the board, but as far as the Steam Deck goes, it is also something in which it is really pushing the limits of the Steam Deck. So as far as the Steam Deck goes, it is at a point where it really struggles in running newer AAA games. And with that being said, with people that are really looking forward to play, the latest and greatest games on the Steam Deck, they really hope for Valve to reveal a Steam Deck 2 so they will be able to enjoy more newer AAA titles better. Now that I gave a brief explanation as to why there's a demand for a Steam Deck 2, I want to transition into talking about what we actually know about the Steam Deck 2 so far. As far as Valve goes with the Steam Deck 2, they have said that they will not consider to release a Steam Deck 2 unless they see there is a generational leap. Now, as far as IGN goes, just the other day, they contacted Valve again asking about the Steam Deck 2, and Valve basically said the same thing. In addition to, they also added saying that they are looking for making a Steam Deck 2 if and only if they are able to release a device that boosts more than 50% of performance compared to the current Steam Decks, as well as having the ability to maintain the proper battery life and important aspects of the current Steam Deck and whatnot. And that is something in which I am really glad that Valve wants to make sure that it is a well-rounded experience for gamers, not just in the performance aspect of it, though performance aspect is great to be able to run more games, but at the same time, the other aspects to make it more well-rounded is also just as important, if not more important. Like for instance, especially with the battery life, even though I'm somebody who plays games mainly at home or at some somewhere where I have access to an outlet, but I much rather have a device in which I don't have to rely on being close to an outlet in order to game, especially with gaming handhelds. The main incentive for a gaming handheld is having the ability to play anywhere and at any time, and I want to be somebody where I have the freedom to play even when I'm not close to an outlet, and still rest assured that I will have a decent amount of time to game before needing to recharge my handheld. So that is something that is really important. Now, even though Valve did not say as to approximately when they will potentially reveal a Steam Deck 2, there is a reliable leaker who suggests that it is most likely that Valve will not reveal a Steam Deck 2 until 2028. Now, as far as 2028 goes, though it may seem potentially too far away into the future for some gamers, but I feel that actually 2028 could be a wise choice for Valve to reveal the Steam Deck 2, and I have two reasons as to why I think that way. So the first reason in which I feel that Valve should wait till 2028 before revealing the Steam Deck 2 is that currently their priorities are on other things. As far as Valve, their priority right now is to focus on number one, bettering the experience of SteamOS, but also number two, focusing on bettering their new upcoming hardwares. So as far as the SteamOS goes, Valve is heavily investing on making the experience of using SteamOS to be better, okay? Recently, most notably, we saw Valve have a SteamOS update that included the feature of low power display off mode. Basically, what that feature is that it allows games to continue downloading even when the Steam Deck screen is off, aka in standby mode. So basically, if you have a really big game that you want to download and it is time to go to bed, you could hypothetically have the screen off and at standby mode, and the game will continually download as you go to bed and be ready to play on the next day. Basically, what I'm saying is that Valve is currently focusing on making SteamOS more friendly to use, and that will potentially give the Steam Deck 2 a better appeal, because even though we will most likely still see updates with SteamOS when the Steam Deck 2 comes out, but at the same time, it's good to have something that is a lot more refined as a user experience. That way it can potentially attract newcomers, aka those who haven't gotten a Steam Deck 1. And as far as SteamOS goes on other devices, what I have read and researched, it seems as if, other devices, there are still some bugs and glitches. So as far as Valve goes, I feel like right now they are also prioritizing and making sure those glitches and bugs are fixed and ready to go, especially when using SteamOS on the other PC handhelds that are not made from Valve. Now, as far as other hardware ventures goes, Valve just the other day announced the new Steam Machine, the new Steam Controller, as well as the Steam Frame, aka the VR headset, and they said that they are aiming to release those three hardwares by early 2026. With that being said, having the Steam Deck 2 released in 2028, aka 2 years after the Steam Machine, the Steam Controller, and the Steam Frame, just makes perfect sense, because it will give Valve plenty of time to refine the Steam Machine, the Steam Controller, the Steam Frame, to make sure that they are all really friendly to use for gamers. Because you gotta understand that there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that any device will be enjoyable and friendly to use. Let's say for the Steam Machine, Valve has to make sure that, the Steam Machine is reliable and that it does not overheat and whatnot, because believe it or not, as far as consoles goes back in the day, remember the infamous red ring of death on the Xbox 360 and the yellow light of death on the PlayStation 3. In order for a device to be friendly, it also has to be reliable, and what better way to make it reliable is to make it something in which it is not prone to overheating. Now, as far as the Steam Controller goes, Valve has to make sure that the Steam Controller is also really friendly to use. There's no bugs and glitches to prevent it from syncing to other devices like the Steam Machine, the Steam Deck, the Steam Frame, or any other devices. It has to be really, really responsive and whatnot. Now, as far as the Steam Frame goes, that's also something in which Valve has to also make sure that it is something in which it is really safe to use, which is the most important thing. However, another thing that I would say is also really important for them to take care of is to make sure sure that the controls of the VR headset will be something in which it is really responsive and also really reliable. There are obviously other things that I personally would not have known because I'm somebody who has never made a controller, a gaming device, or any other aspect, but as far as these devices goes, in order for it to be really usable and friendly to use and whatnot, it is really important to really take a lot of effort to make sure to have the devices run and work properly. And what I find is that according to past histories, 2 years is really a solid amount of time to make sure that the devices run properly. Because let's go back to talking about the PS3 and 360. As far as the PS3 goes with the Yellow Light of Death, for the models that were released between 2006 and 2007, they all were pretty prone to the Yellow Light of Death. However, it wasn't until 2008 when the later fat models were released, and obviously later on with the slim models, that was when the PS3 became much more reliable and they were not prone to overheating as much. Same thing with the Xbox 360. The Xbox 360 were very prone to the Red Ring of Death, especially the launch models. However, towards 2007, with the Xbox 360 Elite, the big black ones, that was when the Xbox 360 was not as prone to the Red Ring of Death, and obviously the Xbox 360 Slims were very solid and reliable. So yeah, especially with hardwares, sometimes it may take some time for it to be solid and really friendly and reliable to use. Now, you may be wondering, Joe, couldn't Valve potentially just have a whole bunch of members to be in charge of making the new Steam Deck 2? Couldn't they just do that and be able to make the device simultaneously while having the other teams take care of the Steam machine and the Steam frame and make the Steam frame and Steam machine to be also optimal? Couldn't they do it simultaneously? And my answer to that is it is very unlikely. Because you gotta understand that even though Valve is a private organization in which it doesn't reveal, how many employees work in their company, but there has been some leaks that suggest that as far as Valve Corporation goes, they only have 300 plus employees. And 300 plus employees is really not a big corporation. Sure, Valve does dominate in the PC gaming community, but the company's size itself is not that big. What I'm getting at is because Valve is a small corporation, they only can invest in certain amount of projects at once. And so even for me, I was really surprised that they would invest on the Steam frame and the Steam machine at the same time. I would have been already really happy if they revealed one of them. I really thought that it was only gonna be the Steam frame until they surprised me and revealed the Steam frame as well as the Steam machine. And so that's the thing. In order for Valve to make sure that all their devices are gonna be really smooth and user-friendly, it's better for them to really invest in making the experience of playing on the Steam machines, playing using the Steam controller, as well as playing the Steam frame to be really, really awesome and reliable and solid before considering to do a Steam Deck 2. And 2028, in my opinion, just gives them plenty of time to refine the experience with the Steam frame, the Steam machine, as well as the Steam controller before moving on to the next project, aka the Steam Deck 2. Now, the second reason in which I feel like Valve should wait till potentially 2028 to reveal the Steam Deck 2 is that they will then potentially have a better picture on what exactly the Steam Deck 2 ought to be when it comes to how powerful it is, as well as the performance and whatnot. Because as far as leaks and rumors goes, it does suggest that Sony may be making another handheld, possibly alongside with their PlayStation 6. And as far as the PlayStation 6 goes, it is rumored that potentially it will release in 2027, which in my opinion, the PlayStation 6 releasing in 2027 is a very educated guess of when it will actually be released. Because as far as PlayStation history goes, as far as recent generations goes, the consoles all released 7 years apart from each other. The PlayStation 3 released in 2006, the PlayStation 4 released in 2013, the PlayStation 5 2020. So based on the pattern of the previous previous generations as when the new consoles release, it really suggests that there's a potential situation where the PlayStation 6 will release in 2027. And if the PlayStation 6 release in 2027 and the rumors are correct with Sony releasing a handheld alongside it, then potentially we will see a handheld coming out also in 2027 from Sony. Now, you may be asking, Joe, why is that related to us? Isn't it that if Sony releases a handheld, it will be a console, not a PC? While that is true, but I will say this, a lot of people who bought the Steam Deck used to be console gamers at heart and decide to step into the PC gaming community because of Steam Deck as well as SteamOS. And so Sony currently, aside from, Nintendo, are the biggest players in the console gaming market. So what I'm saying is that in order for the Steam Deck 2 to get its fullest potential as far as the number of units sold, it must prove to console gamers again that they are a worthy competitor, that it is a device that is worth checking out. It is a device in which it will bring value to the gamers to keep an eye out on. And what better way to do that is to observe how the competitors draw in the gamers to pick their device up. They need to pay attention to how powerful the specs are with the potential handheld, but also pay attention to the battery life and the overall experience, and to figure things out to make it a worthy competitor. So yeah, if Sony releases the PlayStation 6 in 2027 and alongside it Sony also releases a handheld, then it makes sense for Valve to observe what gamers like and potentially release a Steam Deck 2 in 2028 to compete with it. Now, before I wrap this video up, I want to discuss about what I hope to see in a Steam Deck 2. Now, as far as the Steam Deck 2 goes, I really hope to see Valve make the Steam Deck 2 to have a bigger screen. And what I mean by bigger screen means that bigger than the Steam Deck OLED, which had a 7.4-inch screen. Now, I understand that my previous video where I talk about a Steam Deck LCD and where I said that the 7-inch display is decent enough for you to be immersed in games. The reason I said that is because, the Steam Deck LCD was on sale for $319. It's not on sale anymore, but when I made that video, it was $319. And $319, I feel like having a 7-inch screen is something in which it is still worth it at that point. However, if I'm paying for a new and premium price point for a handheld, I do not think that 7-inch display is enough, okay? As far as me goes with my experience with newer handhelds, I really enjoy having the ability to game on an 8-inch screen. I really enjoyed gaming on the Nintendo Switch 2. I also really enjoy the ability to game on a Lenovo Legion Go S when I went to Best Buy to try out the Lenovo Legion Go S. So yeah, what I do hope is that for the Steam Deck 2, Valve will include a bigger screen that is preferably 8-inch or bigger. Now, the second thing in which I hope to see is for Valve to include TMR technology in the thumbsticks of the Steam Deck 2, okay? TMR technology basically helps improve the longevity of the sticks by preventing, stick drift and whatnot. And so that is something that I hope to be included in the Steam Deck 2. I mean, hell, the Steam controller is said to have TMR technology thumbsticks, so I don't see why the Steam Deck 2 cannot have TMR technology thumbsticks. That is something in which I really hope Valve to include when they release the Steam Deck 2. Because even though I have not suffered much from stick drifting on my Steam Deck currently, but that's not something in which I wanna experience. It is something in which it was a nightmare in itself when I used the OG Nintendo Switch with the Joy-Cons, and where they drifted, it was a nightmare. So that's not something in which I wanna repeat. Now, the third thing in which I would love to see in a Steam Deck 2 is better physical click mechanics when it comes to the 2 two trackpads. Because as far as the Steam Deck OLED goes and the Steam Deck LCD, I'm not a fan of the high click default sensitivity of it. I'd like to have a really clicky feel, kind of like how you press the triggers as well as face buttons. Because as far as the trackpads goes right now, I kid you not, there are times when I accidentally touch the trackpad in which I don't mean to, and that just gets a bit annoying. Now, last but not least, I obviously want a significant performance boost. Now, even though I am not someone who is really picky on the graphics side of things, but I do want to see newer games having the ability to run decently well as while maintaining a great battery life. What I mean by having a great battery life is having the device to run at a minimum of at least 2 hours of gameplay, no matter how graphically demanding the game is. And also, last but not least, talking about performance, I would also love to see the Steam Deck 2 having 32 gigabytes of RAM at its minimum, as what I find is that a lot of newer games, even though they can handle a device that has 16 gigabytes of RAM, but that is the minimum, the recommendation for the hardware to run the game in order to get the most out of the game is 32 gigabytes of RAM. So yeah, these are a few things in which I hope Valve will include when they release a Steam Deck 2. But what do you hope Valve to include in a Steam Deck 2? We'll love to discuss in the comment section below. It's just amazing how Valve takes the time to heavily invest on Steam Deck as well as SteamOS, making sure that the device and the software are things that are really optimal and really user-friendly, as well as really fun and enjoyable for gamers to use. And I cannot wait to see what Valve has in their future projects. Even though I'm thinking of potentially getting a Steam machine, potentially a new PC handheld that is more powerful, but if Valve releases the Steam Deck 2, that is something I for sure will definitely pick up. But I want to know your thoughts. Are you looking forward to a Steam Deck 2, or do you think that the Steam Deck that we have right now is good as it is? What do you expect Valve to include in a Steam Deck 2? Do you think the Steam Deck 2 should be released in 2028, or do you feel that the Steam Deck 2 should be released a bit sooner or a bit later? We'll love to discuss in the comment section below. And if you love this discussion video, I have a whole playlist of a whole bunch of discussion videos. A lot of the videos are pertain to things I find interesting in the gaming community and also pertain to Steam Deck. I potentially will expand to talking about the Steam machines and potentially other PC handhelds and all these fun stuff, so feel free to check out the discussions playlist. I will link it in the end screen. And as always, if you love gaming discussions, gaming lists, gaming reviews, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really love this video, please hype it. It will help the algorithm to recommend this awesome video to others who potentially will be interested. But anyways, as far as my schedule goes, I try to post on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific time and occasionally on Fridays. So stay tuned. Once again, my name is Joe Wang for the Nomadic Gaming Guild, and game on!